Think of the excitement of being a kid on the first day of school. Now imagine what it would feel like if your family couldn't afford to send you with a backpack and school supplies. Help Goodman Community Center give every kid a great start to the school year by supporting their backpack and school supply drive. Visit goodmancenter.org/backpack drive to learn how you can buy supplies and drop them off, order online and ship to Goodman, or simply make a donation and let Goodman do the shopping. Every child matters and every gift helps. Today on CityCast Madison. Did you know Madison played a key role in the rise of 90s alt-rock? Bands like Nirvana, Smashing Pumpkins, and the locally formed band Garbage recorded music gold here. That legend is told in the documentary The Smart Studios Story, about how two Garbage band members, Butch Vig and Steve Marker, created a studio that produced local bands who rocked so hard they ended up attracting national attention. The new Atwood Music Hall is doing a screening of the award-winning doc tomorrow, including a Q&A with the filmmaker Wendy Schneider, former Smart Studios engineer, plus Butch Vig himself. Ahead of the event, we sat down with Wendy to get an inside scoop on the studio's lore and what our local music scene today can learn from Smart Studios' success. It's Tuesday, July 8th. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Bianca.
It is just so good to see you. Old friend, collaborator. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm preparing for the screening of the Smart Studio Story, which has not come back into the front of my life for quite a while. So it's exciting to do promo. It's exciting to talk to people like yourself and to remember a period of our lives that was encapsulated by a film that came out in 2016. So,
yes. Oh, it is such a beautiful time. And this is a deep cut coming back to local screens with a rockin' duo. You, Wendy, and Butch Vig, one of the more prominent local celebrities here in Madison lore, are going to be at the Atwood Music Hall this Wednesday, July 9th, for the screening of your hit, I'll call it a hit doc, The Smart Studios Story, the Midwest link to the history of American rock and roll, and about this little studio that made a huge impact on the alt-rock scene. Can you talk about, why do you think this history about the studio is important today?
I've been thinking about that a lot. And I think that, when I think back to Smart Studios, the making of the film and my time there, I think the innocence and the independence that was really raging around that studio and around the music scene in general was very powerful. And I think that although it was very independent, it really was what was connecting all of us. It was reactive, it was inventive, it was an expression of who we were at the time. It incorporated culture and politics and entertainment and everything in between. And, I miss that time, but I also reflect back knowing that it's influenced all of us so much. So, yeah, it's an important film in that regard.
And can you kind of describe, what was Smart Studios? We're going to get into more of the story, but, the studio itself.
Well, it was a 28-year run, right? So Smart Studios wasn't just one thing. Smart Studios was the launch of Butch and Steve and their ethos and their recording savvy and their personalities and how they opened up the doors to local bands and local music, and then helped that music bridge, through their connections with WRT or venues or other bands. All that music became these multiple bridges that just connected people in a lot of different ways through the essence of the songs and the recordings, of course, but it all happened at Smart Studios. So it's a hard question to answer, what is the essence of it all? But I think that it would be people.
Yeah. Well, I love that you went there because you're many things, but such a deep, profound artist. And you're like, well, I want to answer what the essence is. It was at its most shallow level, it was a recording studio, right? I love that you laid it out that way because that's the reality of it. And what makes it so significant was the people and the community and what it was inspiring. They started right in the 80s. I think they got kicked off in 1983, and then they moved actually across the street to the red building that, to me, it feels so infamous on East Washington at Baldwin, right across from Baldwin Grill. For me, driving on East Wash, I cannot go past that and look at that building and think of its significance. Like, it almost emits an energy, and I don't know if that's me projecting onto it, but for others who don't know the building, they might never notice it, right? They might just drive by. Do you think that the history about what went down with the creators of Smart Studio and the space is well known to Madisonians, like, at large?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm really not sure because things have become so diversified since the studio closed. And one of the reasons why the studio closed was because there were a lot of studios that had opened up and the recording landscape had changed significantly. And I don't feel like it has come back to that place where, wow, there's just one or two studios in a city. So everybody's going to funnel through these spaces and they will become dimensional because of that. I think that people record in different ways now, and you don't have to be in one place and you don't have to be one band in one space. So I think it's an interesting question. Who knows about Smart now? I have no idea.
Well, the city's so transient, right? And there are new people coming in all of the time. But when I find out this is a studio that recorded some really big acts, and it filled me with pride when I learned that. And I learned that because of this documentary.
Yeah. And I think also, like when you pass the building, you project onto that building the essence that you want to receive back from seeing that building. Some people do that with the building, and some people do that with an album, and some people do that with an individual. So I think that the connection to the music and the scene and the history is really different for people. So, yeah. And I mean, I see the building and it harkens back to a time that was really significant in my life. And that time has a beginning and a middle and an end. And I'm grateful that there's a film that encapsulates that for me, at least in the way that I, was able to tell the story at the time. But I think it's different for everyone.
Yeah. And one of your co-collaborators, Butch Vig, who will be with you for the Q&A at the event, obviously he's the drummer of Garbage and he is one of the people who started the studio. So his name's really well known. But I do want to ask about your connection, Wendy, and like what originally set you out to tell this story.
I knocked on the door of Smart Studios probably in 1993, and I asked if they were accepting interns. And the studio manager at the time said, sure, come by tomorrow. And so I started there as an intern/engineer. Butch was in New York City doing the Sonic Youth Dirty record. So I did not see him right away. Steve was in and out. So Steve was always like a bit of a kind of mythic sort of creature. He was, around, not around. He worked at night. I worked during the day.
You always have to have one of those.
So, the way that you worked at Smart or learned at Smart or were welcomed in was usually if you, had some good energy, but also wanted to record a band. So the first band that I think I recorded was the Weaker Youth Ensemble. So that was a local ska band in the 90s. I was doing live sound for them. And that was an access point. Bring a band in, bring them in at night, and we won't charge them. So I learned recording the Weaker Youth Ensemble. I think Steve helped a little with questions. Maybe Butch helped. Maybe Duke helped. Everybody sort of ushered me forward to becoming a young engineer at the studio. And then soon after that, I opened Coney Island Studios, my own space. So it was a lovely place to start my craft, but it soon became where I was balancing like my own recording studio and also still working with bands at Smart.
It's just so awesome. And I know the documentary premiered at South by Southwest, had a huge reception. There's so many touch points for so many people, as you've described. Can you share kind of the broad strokes of some of the acts that recorded there? You talked about your first one, but I know a lot of big names that came through.
I go right back to like Killdozer and DeKreutzen and Tar Babies, all the early local bands where Smart was a real access point for their recordings. And then as Butch became more well known, I think, things really started to turn. And I was actually watching this in the film where Butch and Steve went down to South by Southwest and they brought cassettes and they started to solicit, before South by Southwest was more of a movie festival. It was a music festival, and they just started handing out cassettes and recruiting. And I think that from efforts like that, and also, Sub Pop hearing work that Butch did, and all these other bands that began to hear his work, some of it was through Nirvana, some of it was through Smashing Pumpkins, they began to route themselves to work with Butch and to work at Smart. And that really shifted the gears from a studio that was more local to one that was working with not only independent bands, but now independent record labels like Touch and Go and Sub Pop. So that's where things really began to change for the studio as a whole. Like the phone was ringing off the hook after Nirvana, of course.
Right. Oh, my goodness gracious. And it sounds like full circle for when the documentary came back to South by to have had, the roots of that. He went there earlier on and kind of helped bring some of the energy back to Madison. It is a really cool thing. Of course, people get drawn to the national scene, it's Seattle scene and the connections. That's obviously a part of the title, right? This Midwest hub and its role in the story of American rock and roll. But I love that you highlighted really those early Madison bands. And if people don't, listening are new or don't know them, it's worth going and finding out their stories and watching this documentary.
When I released the film, Bianca, I wanted to do some kind of a soundtrack. So we called the soundtracks American Noise. And Volume 1 are all of the local bands that recorded before Smart Studios really became, quote unquote, Smart Studios outside of the Midwest scene. And so that volume is Tar Babies, Poop Shovel, DeCroixin, all the old original, not old, but all the Spooner, Cattle Prod, all these young Madison bands that they worked with. And then the second record, Volume 2, I wanted to showcase the record labels that had brought in bands to Smart. So it's a very different collection of music. We'll have both of them at the show at the Atwood Music Hall, right? So we'll be moving some vinyl and some posters and some memorabilia from the film. But, there were these stepping stones for Smart Studios, and those were usually the music that got out there and who heard it. This was pre-internet. So
right, there's no Spotify. You are
right.
handing cassettes to
Yes.
people. Yeah.
Yeah. In the same way that, and I hope I get the story right, but like Nirvana came in and did the demos with Butch, and then Kurt Cobain gave cassettes of those mixes to a lot of his friends. And then Thurston Moore gave one to Geffen Records, who heard Nirvana, and then that started the move towards signing them and then doing the full record, with the exception of Polly, which is the song that was done at Smart. That record was then done at Sound City. So, the ways that history began to unfold was really driven by cassettes and live performance. And probably some stickers and beer and all that shit.
Right. Well, the things we love, right?
Yeah. And I think that, what in reflecting now, for me, I think the importance of independent music, the importance of independent voices, these are things that right now are completely threatened in our culture. So when you look at a film like Smart Studios and you see the foundation that independent energy had back then. And that foundation is still something that is significant in people's lives. Butch, Steve, all the engineers, they were access points for that energy. And so if we don't harness that now, meaning like recognize that that is our history, but also incorporate that into who we are now as artists or expressionists, if we don't do that, we're really missing out on an opportunity to share our voices.
On July 19th, experience a night of wonderful music under the stars. Join Madison Opera for Opera in the Park, a free concert in beautiful Garner Park. A Madison summer tradition, Opera in the Park draws thousands of people to enjoy a concert of excerpts from opera and Broadway. Opera in the Park 2025 takes place at 8 p.m. on Saturday, July 19th. The rain date is Sunday, July 20th. The concert features music by Mozart, Bizet, Puccini, Beethoven, and more, performed by Renee Richardson, Emily Tragle, Andrew Bidlack, Benjamin Taylor, the Madison Opera Chorus, and the Madison Symphony Orchestra, conducted by John DeMaine. The audience is always invited to conduct with their light sticks on a special number. So pack your picnic, gather your friends, and join Madison Opera in Garner Park on July 19th to celebrate the power of connection through music. Learn more at madisonopera.org.
This episode is brought to you by San Pellegrino Ciao, a new kind of flavored sparkling water. The kind made with real fruit juice, a pinch of Sicilian salt, and the sparkle of the Italian sun. With no added sugar and just 10 or less calories per can, enjoy. With love, from Italy. By San Pellegrino Ciao now.
I do want to share for a hot, fabulous minute, I was a research assistant on the project. In a blink of an eye. I left WRT's radio station to scratch that filmmaking itch because I'm like, oh, I want to learn from you. And you put me to the archives, which I got to learn were deep and wide. So can you just give people a picture of what went into the process of making this film?
This film took 6 years to make, and a lot of that time was spent reaching out to people and collecting archives and looking at them and incorporating them into a timeline, not only of Smart Studios, but of what was going on in our lives, in culture over 28 years. I was looking at, from the basement to Gishalt to 1254, and then 1254 became remodeled after there was a lot of success for the studios. So the archives needed to fit into compartments around the time frame, but also they needed to work musically with the story that I was telling. So I think that there are over 90 cuts of music in the Smart Studios story, and I wanted that music to help move the audience forward, either emotionally or from a content standpoint. Like what were the lyrics, or what was the song, or was the song going to support what Butch was saying, or what, Billy Corgan was saying. So it was grueling. It was, digging and digging and digging more and getting a phone call that somebody had one photo, from a basement where Butch was working on a 4-track or something. The word had gotten out that I was doing the film and looking for archives. And in some cases they came in other cases I needed to go to the State Historical Society.
You went deep. You put your heart and soul into this, and it really shows. And I do just so genuinely appreciate the conceptual piece of tying, it's a music documentary, but really being meaningful about those song choices that you had throughout. I know how much thought you put into that. Do you have a couple tracks top of mind that you throw out for people that they should listen to that were very emblematic of the Smart Studios journey? I know there's many chapters, but just some highlights.
I think if people can dig into the Appliances, I'm not sure what the name of all the songs are, but the Appliances were just such a rad sounding and amazing, energetic band that did a lot of early recording at Smart Studios. And I was just listening to the Ivory Library song, I think it's called So Far, and just loving the way that fell in the vignette of the band talking about working at the studio. I could really go on and on. Young Fresh Fellows had recorded a single called Sitting on a Pitchfork. And when Butch got the pressing of that 45, he went over to the Friendly across the street. And it was soon to become the most played 45 on the jukebox at the Friendly in Madison, Wisconsin. And here's this band from Seattle, Young Fresh Fellows, making that connection. So there were all these, disjointed pieces of artistic expression that came to light, through Smart Studios, or that came to life through Smart Studios. And that gave them all a connection. And, in a lot of cases it was Butch, but sometimes, it was Duke, it was Steve, it was Doug, it was myself, it was Mike Zirkle, all of us that were recording these bands. What they had in common was Smart Studios. And I think that gives everyone this familial connection to the history that means something. It's like a club, but again, it didn't matter where you recorded. It was about the experience that we were all sharing that, Sometimes it was in, 1254, or it was in the Gishalt building, or it was in somebody's basement.
It's just gorgeous. And all of the connections. It's like you could draw a really wonderful map.
Oh, yeah, I have one.
Right. That go right to Madison, right? You released this doc back in 2016. Like, is there anything about this story that's just really hits after all these years?
I tried to lay low on being very specific from a timeline standpoint when I was making the film, because I didn't want people to visually have to keep going back to where are we in time right in this moment, So the film is very much about the experience that people had and the trajectory, right, of an idea that Butch and Steve were like, let's record these bands. That's all they ever really wanted to do, was support bands, record bands, and get bands played on the radio. And that's exactly what happened. They would go down, and I was just watching the section with Harry Ragg, and they would show up with their half-inch mixes of local bands that they'd recorded, and they would be on air. And it was a real beautiful cycle that they were contributing to, with how local music got out there, and then how bands from Milwaukee were included in that, and then Chicago, and then Minneapolis. I think that with the films that I make, and I know this from Angels of Dirt, I tend to look at the timeline and be more poetic with how and when things are happening, because I want the audience to lean in a little bit and wonder, or lean in a little bit and be curious about what the connections are in the story. Smart Studios is a really good film to watch from head to tail, because there's a lot of connections that the audience makes without necessarily being given those connections in the film.
Shop 4th of July savings at the Home Depot right now and get up to 40% off, plus up to an extra $600 off select appliances with free delivery, like Samsung. From all-in-one washer dryers to smart refrigerators, upgrade to tech you can trust with Samsung appliances. The Home Depot has what you need to simplify your routine. Don't miss 4th of July appliance savings at the Home Depot. Free delivery on appliance purchases of $396 or more. Offer valid June 18th through July 9th. U.S. only. See store or online for details.
Yep, the beauty junk drawer. Full of those used once, why did I buy this? That was a waste products. Stop adding to it. Shop at Sephora and break the cycle. Sephora only carries the hot, high-quality products you'll never regret buying, and brands you can only find at Sephora, like Kayali, Makeup by Mario, Kerastase, and M Beauty. Shop the hottest beauty with no regrets, only at Sephora.
Something that strikes me is that do-it-yourself energy that imbues the entire documentary, right? Like, I know, Wendy, you are a rock and roller yourself. You're a musician with the band Howler. How do you think the legacy of Smart Studios can impact today's scene? And maybe already has. Like, do you see it impacting our scene in any way today? And where can lessons be learned?
Well, I don't know if it was Smart, but it was really the people behind Smart had an approach that was a work ethic that was, undeniably rooted in a commitment to an outcome that was going to be strong, right? Whether or not it was going to be judged as good or bad, it was just going to be strong, and it was going to be a committed and devoted effort to finish something and to bring something out into the world. And I think that learning from the engineers there, Butch, Steve, and everyone, there was just a real dedication to the project at hand. You were serving the outcome. You're always serving the outcome. And I think that while we talk about a DIY ethic, Smart was, as a business, it might have been DIY, but it was very collective inside those walls. Every session involved one person and how that person was supported by the other engineers. Everyone wanted everyone to do a really good job. And they were there to, offer not so much 2 cents, but really like, what do you need and how can I help you get this done? I can't say whether or not that exists in the same way that it did back then, but I want to believe that it absolutely does. I think that bands are collaborative to get their work done. There seem to be, like 100 times the amount of music now than there was back then. So it's harder to get a sense of what is the vibe of the Madison scene, because Madison is just a real different landscape now, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's hard to track. Like you said
Yeah.
earlier, it's similar with TV stations where everyone's not watching the news from the the 1, 2, 3 channels. They're going to all different kinds of places. So it's good to tune into local media like this and Tone Madison, like people trying to cover the art scene to try and keep up. But I totally agree. And, I just love you emphasizing what was really strong and what you were sensing and a part of at Smart Studios, which was hard work and integrity, right? Integrity to the art, right?
Yes.
Wendy, I did want to point out, like, you are a local storyteller, more than just this project. You mentioned your documentary, Angels of Dirt, on motocross with some women from this area. You've been traveling Europe with that latest documentary, which is so awesome. You've also done a lot of other work, a series on local artist profiles with Wisconsin Public Media. Why is it important to tell the stories of our art scene and to tell them well?
And to tell them briefly.
Unlike that question.
The story of Smart and having the opportunity to tell that story was a real gift for me and a real challenge at the same time. I mean, I really made that film for Butch and Steve, and then I made it for the Madison community, right? They needed to see it first. Butch and Steve weren't part of the making of the film. I basically showed them the film when it was finished, and they were like, cool. There were maybe a few tweaks from there, but, after that, it was clearing the 90 plus cuts of music and the artwork and then showing it at the festival. And it was one of the more exciting nights of my life. Same with, Angels of Dirt premiered at the Barrymore, same theater. I had a really amazing experience telling the story of women who race motorcycles in Wisconsin. And I've been here long enough, I've been here 35 years now, and the Midwest tapestry is part of me at this point, So I love incorporating other people's lives into the work that I do and the skills that I have. And I've been really blessed with opportunities to allow my creativity to be part of that process. That's been, I've been very lucky because I don't pick and choose. I mean, I'm always hustling for work, and I love doing work in Wisconsin, but I feel like really honored to be able to tell the stories that I've told so far.
Well, I want to underscore the word lucky. We are very lucky to have you as a storyteller in the community. And this is going to be a great opportunity for folks to see this incredible work of art and love and archive and history, and to understand the Smart Studios story ahead of your event at Atwood. What are you hoping folks will take away from this screening?
I think the people who haven't seen the film are going to be really entertained by what all that history has encapsulated. 28 years of Smart Studios tells a much larger story, and it's not just about music, right? It's about how people moved through their artistic expression, if it was music or if it was an album cover, but how they were able to do that during a time where they really needed to work pretty hard at getting that word out. I think that it's we did not have the channels that we have now. And I want to just, really nod to, the strength of, and it still is very strong, like the record store to the radio, to the venue, to the practice space, to the recording studio. I think that all those channels are still as strong and well connected than they've ever been. They're still the real channels for sharing music and getting music out there and meeting people and collaborating and growing your art. I would watch this film and think, wow, like it's not that different now than it was back then. Or, Jesus, look at how it was back then. I think it's really because I'm still like making my own posters and hanging shit up and, and going down to WRT to promote stuff. So I tend to not move too far out of my box of comfort, but other people do. I don't know if that made any sense at all.
No, it did. But But bolstered, like going down to WRT, bolstered by the community and putting up signs. I love seeing signs, like physical signs out in the street. That sort of connection to the materials is really lovely. And hey, long live our art scene. And I hope people really come out and that they've learned a lot from this, that, maybe they seek out opportunities to see the documentary.
I want to also just shout out to Topher and the Atwood Music Hall, because he reached out to me. He wanted to include this in the launch of a venue. And the Atwood Music Hall incorporating smart studios into their opening month is saying that they want to include, films like this that are recognizing the history of where we've all come from. And smart is one slice. There's a lot of music that's been going on in Madison and in Wisconsin, and smart didn't cover all of it. I watch it now and I just wonder, who else could I have included, or how could I have expanded the film in certain ways? But I had to, as a filmmaker, keep things on some level a little bit simple for your audience so that it didn't become like this crazy landscape of 108 different people talking about recording at smart studios. There needed to be a story. And for me, that story was the trajectory of these two guys and this little recording studio, and what happened to that over 28 years was really, really remarkable and a lot of fun to look back on. So I hope that people come away having enjoyed looking back at 28 years of the studio and the people, of course, that made the studio.
Wendy, this has been such a pleasure. It's such a cool moment for me. Like a decade later, we're getting to have this conversation about this fantastic film. I could not be happier, and just we're all thankful to you, one of our fantastic local storytellers.
Thank you so much, Bianca.
That's Wendy Schneider, director of the Smart Studios story, The Midwest Link to the History of American Rock and Roll. If you want to learn more about the Atwood Music Hall screening tomorrow, Wednesday, July 9th, head to our show notes for a link. That's all for today, here on CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, your host. If you enjoyed the show, why not share this episode with a rock and roller? All right, we'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until next time, take good care and rock on.